Great. I'm going to give it just a minute because it's showing for me that this event hasn't started yet in the streaming.
Yeah, me too.
I see that come up. I will kick us off. I'm going to give it just a minute because it's showing for me that this event hasn't started yet in the streaming.
Yeah, me too.
I see that come up. I will kick us off. All right, I have heard my voice feeding back a little bit, so I am confident that we are indeed live. And I'm going to navigate away from the screen. So good morning. Thank you so much for joining us. Happy to have you here. I have just dropped into the chat an invitation to introduce yourself and let us know where you are joining from. And without any more introduction, we will get started. So thank you so much for joining us. Whether you were intrigued by the catchy title, the witty presenters, or a passion for high quality, consistent, and comparable cost data, we are glad that you're here. Barbara and I are here because we are obsessed with cost-effective investment in urban sanitation, and because we believe we have identified the silver bullet for achieving universal access to safely managed sanitation services. CACTUS, which stands for Climate and Costs in Urban Sanitation, is a set of tools designed to enable meaningful comparison of the real costs of urban sanitation across factors including technology type, geographic location, and population size. CACTUS began as an exercise in benchmarking costs and in generating evidence-based estimates for cost, greenhouse gas emissions, and welfare effects of urban sanitation systems. We set out to begin with what we thought was going to be the easy part of the project, collecting empirical data on the costs of real sanitation systems. As proud members of the Cost-Effective Urban Sanitation Investment Fan Club, we had a simple but elegant vision for the way that benchmarking and generating estimates would drive investment in the most impactful, cost-effective technologies and business models for delivery of safely managed sanitation services in urban areas. 1, we would gather real and not modeled data on the costs incurred by actual existing sanitation service providers. 2, we would figure out how to compare the cost of anything from a one-person operation with a single vacuum truck exhauster to those from a large-scale citywide sewerage network and anything in between. 3, we would identify the most cost-effective technologies and systems. And with our robust approach to normalizing and analyzing an unprecedented volume of empirical data, our findings would be credible and clear. And then 4, investors would take our advice, leading to 5, widespread scaling up of the most cost-effective investments. Of course, this is a bit of an exaggeration, and even if these 5 steps were all that it took, scaling up safely managed sanitation would be, and is, far from simple. When we began gathering cost data, we found that the endeavor was even more complicated and challenging than we'd anticipated. The empirical data on the real costs of urban sanitation are sparse, and where cost data is available, efforts to analyze and compare it are inhibited by wide variation in technologies, inconsistencies in classifications of costs, and the rarity of actual systems encompassing the full sanitation value chain. Simply put, we found that there is no standard method for categorizing costs in urban sanitation. What this meant for our project is that we couldn't start our analysis without first creating a classification system for costs and then establishing distinct clusters of components and elements of sanitation systems that would enable comparison across technology types and parts of incomplete systems. Beyond what that meant for our project, we were struck by the implication for any analysis or modeling exercise for which the cost of sanitation services is an input. Even the most sophisticated modeling tool requires high quality data to generate actionable insights. And we just stumbled across a discovery that across the sanitation sector, we've all kind of been using garbage as our inputs. So we pivoted. we sat down to develop what we'd found to be missing: a standard costing methodology that would enable collection of high-quality data on the real costs of urban sanitation, so that all the amazing models and predictive tools that the brilliant minds across our sector have been building can stop taking in garbage and inevitably spitting garbage out. Here it is, the simple, read not so simple, silver bullet. High quality empirical data in and meaningful, actionable insights out. So if we start at the end of where the arrows are pointing and move backwards, the guidance for this slide is that citywide inclusive sanitation and achieving SDG 6.2 require intentional scaling up of the most impactful and cost-effective technologies and services across the full value chain, which requires identification of those best practices, which in turn requires rigorous, replicable analysis of cost data from urban sanitation services, which requires meaningful comparison of actual, not modeled costs for existing sanitation services, which requires consistent, straightforward classification of sanitation costs across technologies and stages of the value chain. And what's required for that is both the existence of a standardized costing methodology and widespread adoption and sharing of cost data categorized according to the standardized methodology. As a sector, we have countless studies telling us that there is a dire need for much more investment in sanitation if we want to achieve SDG 6.2. And we don't just want to achieve it. We want it to be cost-effective, climate resilient, and to drive the circular economy. We truly cannot afford to invest in anything but the most cost-effective sanitation technologies. So if you leave today with one takeaway, it should be that no one is making investment decisions based on a robust set of empirical cost data yet. It is possible and integral that we understand what we are getting for the money we are currently spending on sanitation. And we are here to tell you that we have a free, as easy as we could possibly make it way to do that. But we need your help. Over to you, Barbara.
Okay, thanks very much, Ruthie. Please shout out Ruthie if you don't hear me clearly. So CACTUS, the database, currently contains data on 179 sanitation components. So we're beginning to get a bit of an idea of how the costs of real systems stack up in the real world. The system reports capital and operational costs, and importantly, we're calculating the total cost liability of the system as a whole. So this is the data you need if you want to design financing options. These data are all freely available, open access, and can be used by anyone simply by looking at our website. Next slide. The database is set up so that we can normalize all data to common years and common currencies using purchasing power parity. And we begin to see what individual sanitation components cost to build and operate. For example, here you can see some data on containment systems on the left and emptying and transport systems on the right. We've been examining these data to better understand how to optimize emptying and transport for scale. We can also see that generally manual emptying and transport in blue is more expensive than mechanical emptying and transport in orange. Once we have enough data, we can start to see how geography influences cost. For example, recently we found that some costs are higher in Zambia than in other countries in Southern and Eastern Africa. And we can trace the extent to which this is due to the costs of fuel, which are higher in Zambia and which doesn't have its own port. We do this by drilling down into the underneath data and having a look at the specific components. One more click, yeah, lovely. And one click again. Finally, we can pull these data together to look at the costs of on-site systems as a whole. Next slide, please. Here in orange are the on-site systems. That means all the systems that are based on pits and tanks with road or manual transport, and the off-site systems, all the systems which use pipes to transport excreta, in blue. Most costs for most total sanitation systems cluster around $500 per household per year. So this is the total cost liability. That means all the money that needs to be found from user charges and from public finance in order to cover the ongoing operational costs and the capital cost liabilities of complete systems that deliver safely managed urban sanitation. What we need now is more data so that we can understand more about what drives costs up and down, and therefore, what are the most efficient strategies for delivering sanitation in a range of locations and contexts. The website is simple to use. You can contribute and get something back immediately. For example, here are some data analysis that we did with colleagues in a town in Kenya. These were some data here outlined in the circle about the costs of their sewerage system. Next slide, please. But we used the underlying data to explore how their low connectivity rates were driving up high per household cost liabilities. So in fact, we uncovered the fact that in their case, sewerage was not expensive compared to other systems, as it happened, but simply it was expensive because connection rates were slow. Next slide, please. So in summary, currently, cost data are opaque and uncertain. This makes it difficult for even the most dedicated decision maker to make an informed decision. It also creates space for inefficiency and even corruption. But, and this may be the most relevant thing to say at meetings like this, it also makes space for grandiose claims for cost efficiency and for magic bullets. CACTUS allows us to be specific and clear about the total cost liability of sanitation interventions. Our database uses tools that allow you to collect and report data using standard formats systematically. What we're calling for is for everybody in the community to start using standard structures, and we would suggest that the CACTUS reporting structure is a good place to start to report and analyze your costs, and to require grantees to do the same thing. We have a set of really simple and easy to use tools and handbooks to enable you to do this. Thank you very much. That's a very quick scamper through the whole system. We wanted to talk to you about CACTUS, which stands for Climate and Costs in Urban Sanitation. We wanted to tell you that this is a set of tools which are designed to enable meaningful comparison of the real costs of urban sanitation across factors including technology type, geographic location, and population size. And as Ruthie said at the start, we really believe that the ability to understand costs is one of the elusive magic bullets that could enable us to make really great policy and implementation decisions in the future. Thank you. Back to you, Ruthie.
Great. Thank you so much. So I was just pasting into the chat. We have, Barbara and I have each done a pretty impressive job sticking to our slides and keeping things concise. So we have a good bit of time to take questions from participants. So please feel free to share any questions in the chat, and we will happily do what we can to answer them. And just noting up here, you have on the screen our contact information, as well as the website for CACTUS, which Barbara mentioned. And we'll give a moment for questions to come in.
Vishwanath has a really great question, and that's absolutely, that's a really good question, Vishwanath. So when we present these data, we're always very careful to point out that the two systems are not providing a comparable level of environmental protection. They are providing a comparable level of safe management of the human excreta component, provided they're being operated properly. But absolutely, it's important to remember that sewerage systems are usually providing a management system for both grey water and black water, whereas most FSM-based systems are not doing that. So it's a really good point, and it's a really important, I think it's another thing that's really gets exposed when we do these cost analysis with colleagues on the ground, is really understanding that you get what you pay for in terms of how much of the flow is being handled by the system. So yes, FSN systems, as it happens in the database at the moment, look marginally cheaper than the pipe sewerage systems, but they're not providing an equivalent management service. It's a very good point.
Great, thank you so much for the great question, and Barbara for taking that one. We have a little bit more time to take questions in the chat, and I would also note that though you cannot chime in and share your comment, comments on what we've shared are very welcome as well.
Ruthie, do you want to take a question, another second question from Vishwanath?
Sure. So this question is on whether the externality of diesel combustion is accounting for. So I guess the question to clarify here is in terms of the costs, which is really where we're taking care to kind of be comprehensive and comparable. The manuals are specific. And so Barbara presented one example of a manual, which I can click back to here. In the cases that diesel fuel would be like expected to be used, that is sort of built into the manual and the costing. In terms of the kind of environmental impact of diesel combustion, as I would say, Barbara, you can speak to this as well, but that is kind of similarly not accounted for. It is accounted for in terms of cost, but in terms of environmental impact, it is not.
Yes, that's exactly right. And that was a very conscious decision on our part, because obviously there are a lot of trade-offs. I mean, you might choose a sanitation system for a whole range of reasons. So we wanted to really zero in on making sure that one of the important inputs, which is how much money do you need to run the system, would be really well documented through this database. So if you were actually selecting a solution, you would take these cost data from our approach, but you would also add on to that your interest in whether you were aiming to minimize, exactly as you say, combustion, environmental impacts from combustion, or overall greenhouse gas emissions, or the extent to which grey water is also managed in the system. So we've really tried to be quite very focused on this, on the total cost liability only. So again, if you just look at the costs as they drop out of CACTUS, you can't assume that all of those cost items are giving you equivalent benefits. That's something which comes in from additional information that you would provide. I want to just pick up on Pedro Andrés' question, which comes after this, in terms of the energy costs we calculate. And just to clarify that we don't calculate anything. The database is reporting actual costs incurred by operators running actual real systems. So if the energy source is diesel and it's being purchased in Zambia, then that's the cost which is which is in the database. If the energy cost is solar, then that's the cost which is being incorporated. And again, just to really clarify, and Vishwanath's picked it up again, and it's really, really a good point, you will have different health externalities and different environmental externalities and different levels of societal benefit from these different systems. The one thing which is standard is that we are reporting costs for complete sanitation systems from collection through to treatment. That's the part of the chain that we've included, and we're including the total stack of money that you would need to deliver that service is what's included inside the box. And honestly, I really appreciate what you're saying, Vishwanath, that it's important for users of the data to then take the next step and look at the variable other reasons why you might make selections of different sanitation systems.
And yes, I would just echo appreciating very much the questions and noting we do have a bit more time, so you can keep them coming. And then to emphasize, again, I think I want to emphasize sort of the gap that we encountered and specifically what we intend to take on with CACTUS. And so part of what we know is that as a sector and as practitioners in the sector, we're really aware of some of these other components, the environmental externality, the health, we're really thinking about the impact on the environment. We're really thinking about the impact on human health. And I think perhaps as a symptom of our commitment to those elements, we've tended as a sector to overlook precision on the cost element. And so we're not necessarily saying this is the only thing you need to know about sanitation systems, but rather we're saying, actually, this is really weak compared to our understanding of some of these other impacts. And we need to get a clear sense of what are you getting for the money you're putting in terms of really getting clear on the costs. Again, not because these other elements like health and environment aren't important, but because we had comparably much lower visibility into what we were actually working with there. So I've pulled back up this slide, just sort of noting that some of the analysis and comparison and identification of best practices is what we envision sort of facilitating with the CACTUS methodology and framework, and just really, really wanting to emphasize that we see the clear classification and reporting of costs as a critical ingredient, but sort of necessary, but not sufficient. And I think actually what I take from the questions in the chat is like confirmation that like we indeed can trust the minds in the sector to look out for some of these other pieces, and that this contribution of clear costing is a critical ingredient to look out for. Barbara, would you take the question that's just come in from Simon?
Yes, the question on scale, Simon, thank you so much. That's a great question. So the costs are so we collect costs from individual components of working sanitation systems. There are some technical niceties about how we chop up systems so that we can have comparable units of cost. But the scale is determined by whatever particular example we're looking at. So if we're collecting data from somebody who has a mechanical emptying and transport service, one of the, because we report all our data as total annualized costs per household or total annualized cost per capita. So the scale of every data point is determined by the scale of the operation for which those data have been collected. What that enables us to do, which is very interesting, is to look at scale effects. So we can already see, and it's no big surprise, that you get economies of scale in sewerage systems. There is also already in the data clear evidence that you get economies of scale in emptying and transport systems. We've got a paper coming out on that shortly. What's interesting is that's a bit more complicated. There's economies of scale, but there are also break points where indirect and sort of ancillary costs jump the unit costs back up again. But that's detail really for the future. What we're really trying to do is to normalize for the total number of households served, which enables us to then interrogate the scale effects on costs of different types of sanitation systems. So we're never going to say or be able to say one type of sanitation is inherently cheaper than another. What we're increasingly able to do, we are starting to sort of explore under what circumstances, in which countries, at what scale do certain systems perform better in terms of cost. And just to respond to Vishwanath's last comment, and thank you very much. And I also would love it if you were here and we could continue the conversation. That would be amazing. Maybe we should just do that anyway, virtually at least. But also we have a paper which you can download from the website. I think it's available. If anyone doesn't find it, please contact us and we can share it. And the website has all of the sort of technical nitty-gritty of what we have in the database. And we have a couple of new papers coming out very shortly, which will all, of course, be open access and available, and we'll share those widely on social media.
Wonderful. So thank you so much for the participation in the chat. We probably have time for one more question if anything comes in, but noting again that what we've got here on this slide is the website for the CACTUS website, which we've talked about quite a bit. You can play around with adding your data. You can download the different manuals and workbooks. And as Barbara said, one paper available now and additional ones coming soon. So please do continue to visit and engage with the website. And then really, I think I can speak for both Barbara and myself that we would love to have a virtual coffee or glass of wine to hear your reactions. So please note our email addresses are here, and really welcoming everything from practical questions on like which manual should I use, or what we would love is like an in-depth discussion on a specific cost that you're unsure how to classify. Very curious to hear where those things are coming up. And also just sort of this broader conversation about the importance of getting real cost data. And what my hope would be is that for those of you who joined, there may have been a little bit of a journey or an arc over the course of this short session of kind of wrapping your mind around what exactly we are offering and suggesting. And so just to welcome both the sort of spreading of the gospel, you can share this around, and feedback for us on kind of which parts of the explanation resonated, where you might have been thinking it was one thing and then realized it was another, because admittedly where we are in the kind of process of CACTUS is moving a bit out of having our heads in the details. You could see how easy it is for Barbara to start talking about a specific component of the costing, and moving into kind of how we share this. And so please feel free to reach out for chats, questions, and general reflections on what we've shared. We understand that things will be very prompt in ending this session and in closing this Zoom room. So just want to thank you again for joining us. Thank you so much for the participation in the chat and for your willingness to have a slightly funny format of conversation in which you are typing to us and we are responding to you verbally and we can't see you. And wishing everyone a really wonderful rest of the week, whether you are in Stockholm in person or joining remotely. And really looking forward to continuing to engage. Thank you so much. And thanks, Barbara. Thank you to our technical support team. And yeah, wishing you all a great week.
Thanks, Ruthie.